Alright, so let's go ahead and begin now. Before we get started, a little message about the format as far as when you have questions. So during the time that I'm working, it's perfectly fine for you to ask me a question, although I may not answer it because I may not be looking at the chat window. I may be looking at what I'm working on. At the end of each session, though, we have a questions and answers period. When it's time for questions and answers, and I say, does anyone have any questions? If you have a question, don't start typing it out. Instead, just type Q and hit enter. That way I can see that you have a question and then type out your question. That way I'm not holding everybody else up while I wait for questions when there aren't any. Now, before we get started, if anyone has any questions on anything up until now, just go ahead and press Q and enter so that I know you have a question. And then we can go ahead and have a brief questions and answers period before we get started. So does anyone have any questions? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's see. This is exactly where we left off. So what we need to do is make this sign-up form actually work. So we need to actually be able to create a username and password and have it go into the database. So the way we're going to do that is, first of all, we need to create some kind of handler for when a form is submitted in general. For right now, we're just going to have a handler for this submit form. Now, see if I can enlarge this. There we go. So right here is the code that executes whenever something is submitted. Now we can see that by doing this. And you can see the word submitted there. Even though it runs on to the next thing, we can still see that that executed. So this is where we need to figure out what to do next. Now, every class that we're building here can have its own functions that do whatever it is that they need to do. So in this case, we're going to have a function to handle the form submission, and we're just going to call that function. Let's just call it handle form submission. Now the function doesn't exist, and I'm not going to create it inside of this class. I'm going to create it inside of the page class that I made for the sign up page right here. So this is where I'm going to create it. And there we go. Now what would happen if there wasn't that particular function? Let's say we have a class that we haven't actually given it this function. Well, then it would fail because the function doesn't exist. But here we have this function, so now we can go ahead and proceed. So we know that inside of the signup class here that what's being submitted is a username and password, which we want to put into the database. So rather than have this here, we're going to put it here. and we can change the logic here. Actually, let's just do this. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Let's see how that works. Should work okay. Okay. I wish I could disable that. There we go. Okay. Okay, now we need to get this database command to actually execute. Oh yeah, I already have it here. So I want single row query. Okay. Yeah, PHP is the language that I like the most. It's just, for me, it's the most fun. If I'm doing a project and it's for fun on the side, I would use PHP. Um, that that's largely because not only do I have a lot of experience with it, but it's a language that you don't really have to think very hard in order to use. Okay, so now we can call that function. Single row query. That should work. Let's find out. Yeah, PHP is extremely forgiving, too much so. A lot of in fact, I'm going to go through very soon and clean up all the warning messages that are accumulating in my PHP error log right now. New password, and I hit submit. Now this should, if I've done everything right, this should actually create a new user in the database. Now, given that it gave me a blank screen, something went wrong, so let's see if I can figure out what. Call to member function single row query on a non-object. Okay. Did this execute before this? That's the immediate question I'd wonder, is did this init function execute first? So let's take a look at the general page class to see. Here's the constructor. Here's where it does the handle form submission, and this is where it does the init. So let's move that. The init should be the very first thing it does. Okay. And now, the problem here is that show content may not work because before we were creating the content before running the init function. So I think I want to do a new function here, create content, and then we're going to change the general class around a little bit, and we're going to take all the stuff that relates to creating content right here. We're going to create a new function for it, like so. Okay, that should do the trick. Okay, page content not found. All right, why is it doing that? Okay, we call init. Then we do create content, then we do show content. Okay, so create content, let's see. Show content, it's not, okay, this is what's executing. So it's the file that doesn't exist. So class name doesn't exist, so I need to give it class name. Or I just need to let it know that class name is equal to this class name, and then I will make sure that that's actually being set. I set it here. There we go. Now let's see what happens. Good. All right, now new user, new password, submit. Okay, that looks good. Now let's see if it actually inserted it into the database. Okay, it inserted a blank row into the database. So let's see why it did that. Well, let's make sure these safe post things exist. Where do they get created? Right here, which is before init. Okay. So obviously that's not going to work. I think I want to do the sanitization before it calls init though. So we're going to move this here. And take it out of here. And move the comment as well. Okay, good. Now let's see if it'll work. All right, got a blank page. Why? Call to alphanumeric on a non-object. Yep, haven't created the object yet at that point. So this needs to go here. And now it should work. Okay, and did we get our... There it is, new user, new password. Now just to make absolutely sure this works, I'm going to create one called user2, pass2, hit submit, and good. Okay, so now we have a mechanism to create a new user. Now we need, logically, a login mechanism where you can only log in if you happen to be in the database. So first we need a login form. Class.login of PHP, okay. Okay. See here we call show content, but we need to remember that we changed that so that we need create content as well as show content. Now it should work. This particular installation is right out of the box, so the Vim is exactly the way you have it right out of the box. The reason I'm not spending a lot of time on the commands for Vim is because really you can use, any editor that you want, and a Vim tutorial would really detract from the purpose of this. But I do recommend that anyone who wants to learn Vim that they use the Vim tutor command, which you can just run right from the prompt here, Vim tutor, and then you'll be able to learn everything you need to know about Vim. Okay, so now we have create content and show content, so now it should work. There it is. All right, now only if I put in a valid username and password should this work. Now the great thing is I already have a function for handling the form submission. Let's see if it works. See? So This is one of the nice things about working with classes the way that we are, is the parent class here, general page class, which this is extending, has this function which we can use to do whatever we need to. And the great thing is it already has the values that are going to be submitted already sanitized. So I can just immediately start using whatever's submitted. In fact, let's see if this will work. What did I call it again? Did I call it save post? Okay. And you can see that it already has everything on Earth. Not mean to that. Hold on a second. There we go. Wow. Okay. All right. So now we can start running a query on the database to see if this is actually doing what we want it to, which of course means we want to make sure that we're including the database class. And now okay, so we're going to say where the username is equal to something and the password is equal to something. The username is going to be equal to save post username, and the password save post password. Let's take a look at that query and make sure it looks proper. It starts here. Okay, username didn't get included, but well, that's because I didn't give it a username. There we go. Okay, now what if I try to put invalid characters in? It still works exactly right because we are already having everything sanitized before it even gets to this point. Okay, so now let's actually run the query. Now, in order to run the query, I need to make sure that we're returning the row when we do this. That we return the row. Okay. So single row query will work. All right. And there it is. And the count is 0 because this particular username doesn't exist, which is good. Now what happens if we try user2 and pass 2? Now the count is 1 because this user does exist. Okay, good. So now we have a system in place where we can create a new user and we can log in as that user. And I believe even know that they're logged in. Let's see if that's the case. Okay, this is where we call our page class. Where is it? Yeah, right here. This authentication. Okay. And we have the do authentication. All right. So we probably want to include, well, let's see. It's already included at that point. So let's look at it. Is authorized. Okay, so let's test that out. So how do I want to do this? All right. Let's do this. Rather than put this on either the login page or the sign-in page, let's put this on the main home page here, which says page not found because we haven't created any content for it yet. So let's do that. First, I'm going to get out of all of this so I don't confuse myself. And now I want to look at, oh, that's from when I was doing the test yesterday. I don't want that. In fact, I want to get around that. That's funny. Okay. Yeah. All right, now okay, so the page doesn't exist because there's nothing that has that class name. But in this case, what would the class be if we haven't specified any? That's determined by the parse URL class, or parse URI class. Okay, that's what looks in the slash here. Remember this regular expression? And let's just go through it again. I know regular expressions is painful, but look. The first character in the regular expression just means the beginning of the string. After that, we have a slash. That means it's looking for a literal slash. So if the URI begins with /signup, then that means the beginning of the string starts with a slash. That's what this means. The beginning of the string starts with a slash. Then after that, we have parentheses. Now the open parentheses just means we want to capture whatever is inside those parentheses. We want to look at that specifically. So inside the parentheses we have something that says, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Inside the parentheses we have something that says this. What does that mean? All right, the brackets here just enclose the thing that we're checking for. So in this case, we're looking for anything. Now this is where it gets a little confusing. In regular expressions, sometimes the same character means two different things. When the caret symbol here is inside of brackets, it is the same thing as saying not. So by having this in the brackets, I'm saying not slash. So I'm looking for any characters that are not slash, and I'm looking for any number of them. So fundamentally what I'm saying is the string begins with a slash, and then there's going to be non-slashes up to a certain point where maybe there's a slash again. But up until the point where there's a slash, I want to capture all up to that point. That's what I'm saying with that regular expression. So for example, let's suppose I wanted to capture the 1, 2, 3 in this example. Here's a regular expression that could do that. It's going to start with a slash. Then there's going to be alphabetic characters, any number of them. Then there's going to be numeric characters, any number of them. And I want to capture those numeric characters. That's how I would do that. So that's the idea of regular expressions, and it's definitely very valuable to learn regular expressions. It's worth it. However painful it looks, it just simplifies so many things once you understand it. So when I look at this, this is the part that reads the URL and sees the word signup here and knows, oh, I'm going to call the signup class. That's what does that. All right, so now the next thing I need to do here is I need to say that if the URI is just a slash, then I need to know that I'm on the home page, and I need to set that to be the class name. So here's how I'm going to do that. Oops. Just like that. Now the reason this works is because the only way that this class is going to work is if there's a string that starts with a slash followed by any number of non-slash characters. Well, if it's the home page, there won't be any number of non-slash characters. And just to confirm, see, home page. And if I put a slash at the end, still home page. Now if I put anything after the slash, any non-slash character, it's going to not think it's the home page, which is what we want. So now we have told our framework how to recognize the home page. Now we need to create content for it. So how do we do that? Well, remember, it's looking in the pages for a file that's going to be class.whatever.php. Well, in this case, can anyone tell me what the file will need to be called? If the class name is homepage, what will the file that I'm going to create be called? Does anyone know? Remember, the require statement basically says I'm looking for a file called yes, exactly, class.homepage.php. Now, a really simple way to create this file is to copy it from something that already exists. If I was to vim this file right now, just class.homepage.php, I don't have it from memory exactly how it's supposed to look. That'd be kind of silly. So what I do instead is I just copy something that already exists. I copy class.login.php to class.homepage.php. And here we go. Now this is the login class. There's going to be a lot of things in here that I'm not going to want, and I can get rid of those. So I'm going to delete all of this. Maybe I don't even need the handle form submission, but let's just leave it there. It doesn't hurt. And that's fine. So now we need to have the content for the home page. Let's go ahead and leave this for now. And now we're going to go into the templates directory. Now take a look. We have an index.html, we have a login form.html, and then we have a pages directory. If we go into the pages directory, we have login.html and signup.html, which both correspond to the appropriate class. So if the class is class.homepage.php, what will the template be? Anyone? Exactly. So now here I can just edit the file directly because it's just HTML, so I'm going to write it from scratch probably anyways. Now if we go to the home page, this is a home page. And now I will remove the message that I had on the previous page. Now I don't remember which file that was in where I wrote the word home page, so I'm going to use a command here called grep. And I'm going to do it, actually, oops. I'm going to look for the word homepage in all files so that I can find it. And there it is. It's classes, class.parseURI. Now, since I'm not sure which of those two have it, what I can do is I can actually vim-p and then put this inside of backticks. And what that will do is it will load both of those files into Vim. Now I can do a search for homepage by just hitting slash for search in Vim and then typing in homepage. There it is, echo homepage. And now save that and quit. Now I'm done. And now if I refresh this, this is a home page. Okay, so let's make the home page a little nicer now. Oops. Oh, there we go. All right. Now before we do that, I think we're going to clean up this templates directory because I don't think we actually use this index.html or login form anywhere. And if we don't use it, we don't need the file. So let's see, first of all, I'm going to grep for index.html. Notice I have to put a slash before the dot because inside of grep, dot means something else if you don't put a slash in front of it. So let's see if anything, okay, I'm going to ignore the swap file, but the public slash index.php does load index.html, so let's see why. It's after the die command. And everything after the die command I don't need anymore. In fact, I don't even need the die command anymore. Oops. Little too eager on the eraser there. Okay. So now, okay, that's fine. And what was the other one? Can't remember. Login form. Well, first let's remove that index.html. We don't need that. Now let's look for login form. All right, let me take a break. So we've actually done a lot, and this was actually a more intense session than usual because I was really just going from one thing to the next. And that's kind of what happens in development is once you get past the very basic skeleton, you very rapidly get into a very complex process where you've got all these different classes and files, and it can get a little overwhelming. That's why it's important to know all these extra tools like how to search for which file contains what code and how to properly debug and things like that. So we'll go ahead and stop here as far as the programming segment is concerned, and I'll open it up for questions and answers, and it's fine, whatever question you have, just ask and I'll go through and I'll explain it. So if you have a question, type Q and enter, and then we'll go through it. There's a few things you can do. You can use a function that changes any special characters to a safe version of those characters. So for example, maybe it changes a period into a slash period, which because of your programming experience you know will be safe in that case. There's actually functions that do that. One of them is, I believe, called MySQL real escape. And that function, whatever you give it, it will give it back to you in a form that it's safe to insert into the MySQL database, whatever it happens to be. That's one option. And the other option is if you know specifically what special characters you're going to allow, just explicitly allow those in your regular expression. So instead of saying something like A to 0 to 9, well, you also know that you're going to need the @ character, so just put in that character. So that's how you do that. And if you have a question after you type Q, just go ahead and type out the question. Once you hit Q and I know you have the question, just start typing it out. I don't memorize it. I generally don't write it down anywhere unless you know, just kind of like for planning purposes. I might do something like this. I might say, okay, I'm going to have a class called, you know, T general page class, and then the children class of those are going to be like class.signup.php. But generally I don't do that. Once the program gets large enough, you really can't do that anyways. Hold on one second. Okay, I'm back with you. So yeah, generally, I mean, I don't really do that. The only time that I go through that kind of process is if I'm planning or I'm just trying to maybe make sense of a more complex project. But what you've seen me do in all of these sessions is what I've done in these sessions. I haven't done anything on this project at all. Not even, not even with a notebook and pen. I haven't done anything on this project except what you've seen me do in these sessions. So that then raises the question, since I don't memorize it, how on earth do I navigate everything? The answer is I simply search for something that I know is in a particular file. Like I'll say, okay, well, I know that one of the functions that I need is called something form handler, so let me just grep for whichever files contain that. Oh, here it is. And that's kind of how I do that. Again, though, when it gets complex enough, I will start writing out some documentation, even just for my own sake, but it's not at that point yet. Okay, a handler is really just anything that handles something. There's not like a technical term for it. It's like, saying what is a creator or what is a content creator. You really just kind of come up with the names that fit the purpose of what it is you're trying to do. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to handle form submissions. All right, so I'm creating a form handler, a thing that handles form submissions. That's basically the idea with that. PDO is great for database access, but it's not as beginner friendly as what I'm doing here, and that's why I chose what I did. And yeah, I mean, an event handler in general is kind of the same thing. I mean, in some sense, a form handler is an event handler, the event being submitting the form. So if anyone else has any questions, just go ahead and type Q so that I know you have a question. Yeah, I use Vim pretty much for anything at all that I'm doing that involves text editing, because it is a fantastic text editor, especially once you learn it and you become proficient in it. You won't want to use another text editor. What other languages? I've programmed in a lot of languages. I probably couldn't name them all because it's over the course of 15 years, all the different languages I've programmed in. You name it: Python, C, C++, PHP, Ruby, Perl, TCL, just a lot of languages. No, I don't. I don't use HJKL to move around in Vim. And for those of you who don't understand what he's saying, when you write in Vim and you want to move around, you can use the cursor keys like this. I'm using the cursors, or you can use the H key and the L key. And to go up, you can use the up arrow. To go down, you can use the down arrow. Or to go up, you can use the J key, or I'm sorry, the K key, and down the J key. No, I don't do that. I just use the cursors. I did try to see if I could make that happen. It just wasn't ever comfortable. So I just use the cursors and it works just fine. Yeah, it's something that's the creators of Vim feel very strongly that you should get used to doing. I just don't like it either. I've never gotten used to it. The biggest advantage to using Vim, let's see. The biggest advantage to using Vim is the fact that you can jump to anywhere in what you're editing. Suppose I want to, now watch me use the cursor here. I use the cursor and I go down to this line and I want to go to where it says tparse URL. This is where I want to edit. And the time it takes to move the cursor there. Or I can just push /t, type part of it, hit enter, and I'm there. So when you become proficient with Vim, you can very rapidly move around in your code. You can jump from point to point, and the less that you're doing this, the better. The less you're moving the cursors using the arrow keys, the better. I mean, yeah, you'll do it sometimes, but generally you'll want to just jump straight to where you want to go. The way I deal with debugging in any language is either A, to use a debugger, in the case of, let's say, a C program, or in the case of a scripted language like this, the way that I debug it is to have a lot of logging messages that show me everything that's taking place through the program. What I'll probably do in the next session is actually go through this and start adding in proper logging messages. Not really sure I'm quite at that point yet, but it's getting pretty close to that point. The way I judge whether or not I'm at that point yet is how long it takes me to debug something. If it takes me less time to debug it than it would take to add in all the logging commands, then there's no reason to do it. But once it reaches the point where I'm saying, yeah, I'm taking a lot of time debugging this, then at that point I'm going to just go through the whole thing and make sure that there's tons of logging of what everything's doing so that I can immediately see what's right and what's wrong. Now, something else to bring up on that same note is a lot of times when people are programming, they immediately try to handle like all the things that can go wrong, and they put like if statements for every possible thing that can go wrong. Like in the case of the form handler, it might be if, the length is too short, then do this, and if, the MySQL database isn't online, then do this. And the problem is if you do that, if you take a lot of time trying to cover every eventuality, you'll never end up writing code. You'll just be writing non-stop error handling, and you don't want that. You want your error handling to be only as extensive as is necessary. You don't want it to be covering errors that are likely to never happen. You just want to make sure that if an error that is unlikely does happen, you want to make sure that you have a way to go back and debug it by seeing where it happened. And if you're learning C++, using a debugger is not as important than if you are more proficient in C++. I mean, the truth is, you really have to become proficient in using a debugger too. It's not just something you can start doing, especially if you're just learning C++. If you're learning C++ and you have some problem in your program somewhere and you don't know where it is, take the same approach of trying to log as things happen through your program, and then just like what you can do with PHP, really, you can have a file, open the file, write logging messages to it, and then you'll be able to find where your problem is. All right, so does anyone else have any questions? If so, just go ahead and type Q so that I know. No, not cout. Cout is the equivalent of echo in PHP. And you want to do exactly not that. You want to put the messages into a file somewhere, a log file that does not get seen by the person using your program, but can be there as a tool for a developer. And the nice thing is if you do that and you have a function that does that, when you're ready to release your program, you can just simply have a version of your program that contains a function that logs, and have a different version of your program that contains a function that would log but actually does nothing, and then you have your development version and you have your release version. That's one way to do it. All right, so if you have a question and you've typed Q, just go ahead and type it out. I'll be basically covering every PHP concept that I need in order to build the thing that I'm building. Still waiting on 2 questions. If it was a more serious project, like you say, I might still use PHP. I'm very proficient in PHP. I can handle pretty much any project in PHP, and it's fun. So don't take the meaning of what I said to mean that I think PHP is an inferior language. However, that question might be very different if I'm going to have other people helping me on the project, because the advantage to PHP is that it's very easy, and the disadvantage to PHP is that it's very easy. And if you hire someone who claims to know PHP and they're not really proficient at it and they're working with you on a PHP project, you will have a disaster. So if it comes to, there's a lot to consider when doing a project in terms of what language you're going to use, in terms of how you're going to build it. And one of those considerations is who else is going to be working on it with you, and how much of it are you going to be doing alone. That, at least to me, is one of the bigger considerations. And I've done projects with Ruby, I've done projects with PHP, with Python, and sometimes it's just a matter of looking at the project and deciding what to do. Like, for example, there was a program that I wanted to build in Python, and there was already some Python source code that was very similar to what I wanted to do. And so it just made sense, okay, well, why don't I just build this in Python? Because there's already something out there that does something very similar, and it's open source, and I can read it, and then I can do that in Python. So a lot of it has to do with what resources are available for the language I'm using. Great example, in C, I wanted to do a program in C that in the end I decided was going to do some MySQL operations. And then I discovered that it was impossible to find a MySQL library for C. There were libraries for C++, but there weren't libraries for C for MySQL, so I decided to do it in C++ instead. So what language you choose, there's a lot of factors to that. The best answer is use the language that you're most comfortable with in that particular situation. I wouldn't say that PHP is the language to learn in order to be able to pick up other languages quickly. I would say C is the programming language to learn to be able to pick up other languages quickly, because when you learn C, you really get to understand programming at its heart. And then other languages, you're basically able to look at them and say, oh, I see what this would be doing if it was C. You can't really do that with PHP. It's too many layers removed from the raw code. Like when I look at a lot of the PHP code, I can get a feel for how it's doing it or how it could be doing it, but I don't know if that's actually how it's done behind the scenes. It could be done very differently. No, it's not that it's the hardest. I would argue that assembly language might be the hardest of call them actually used programming languages, but it's very comprehensive. And when you learn C, you learn programming. That's why I teach C programming on computerscienceforeveryone.com, because I think it's a great language to learn, especially for a beginner, and especially because if you have the foundation in C, you'll be able to go pretty much as far as you want to go in programming. I mean, there's no limit to how many programming languages a person can learn. I don't even know how many programming languages that I've learned. When you encounter a project in a language you've never experienced before, a lot of times it's just a matter of figuring out how that language does basic things. Every language has a way of setting variables. Every language has a way of including files. It might be just a different command or a different word to do it, but all languages do the same thing in the end. All programming code in the end gets to the point that it's basically assembly language once it's been compiled and everything else. Yeah, writing machine code is something that is a lot easier than it sounds, because all you really have to do is convert something to assembly language, and once you convert it to assembly language, you can convert it directly from assembly language into hexadecimal, and once you've converted it into hexadecimal, you can write it in binary. But I wouldn't attempt to write a program in binary. Yep, I will push to GitHub. As far as a preference of languages, oh, have I ever written a language? I tried to once, and I got to the point where I was able to say to myself, yeah, I get the idea, and this is going to be a lot of work, and I decided not to do that. Preference of languages. When it comes to web development, my favorite language is PHP. Obviously, you can't use PHP to write a real-world application. For a real-world application, my preference is C. And then second favorite for real-world applications would be C++. And then in terms of languages in general, I think next would be maybe Python and so on down the line. Any other questions? The reason I choose Linux is because I like Linux for web development, because there's a lot of great open source programs that you need in order to have a functioning website or a functioning network. Like, for example, the Apache web server, all of these things, it's very easy to get them working in Linux. So that's why I do that. Now, you can also have, Windows web servers. I have very low experience in that. I really don't want a lot of experience in that because it's done very differently than how I'm used to doing it. Now, if I was writing a real-world desktop application, let's say in C, then I'm going to be using Windows for that. And I'll probably be using a program like Code Blocks or a different IDE like that to do that. Yeah, when it comes to Java, I personally don't understand why Java is taught so much in universities. I think C should be taught more than Java. I may ruffle some feathers saying that, but I just really think it. I think that Java is not nearly as I don't think it's as important to learn when you're a beginner. I think that C is a much better language to learn. And then also I think that there's not as much industry use of Java as there are many other languages. I mean, just to run a Java program, you need to install Java onto your computer. It's just not immediately executable. There's a lot of reasons I feel that Java isn't the best language to teach. If someone has a choice in a university and they can either take a class and learn C or take a class and learn Java, they should take the class and learn C. There there isn't an answer to the question of what is the best programming language, which is more or less what you're asking. There just isn't. Every situation calls for a different approach, and part of that approach can be choosing the language that you feel best meets what you're trying to do. And as far as programs that are susceptible to hacking, the right way to think of that is something called CVE, which is, I believe that's short for Common Vulnerabilities and Exploits. And if you go to, I believe it is nist.gov, you can actually see all of the different CVE vulnerabilities that are out there for all sorts of different software, and find out whether or not that software is susceptible to any particular exploit, which is something that's very important if you're involved in security, because you need to be able to keep an eye on that and know whether you have a program that has some vulnerability out there. Yes, if you're doing, let's say, a Windows application, yes, you would want to use C++. But the thing about C++ and C is that although they're not the same language, you can write a C++ program that feels more like C than C++, for lack of a better way of saying it, by not using necessarily a lot of the things that C++ gives you, that some of which are, in my opinion, not worth the trouble. So when it comes to writing a Windows application, yeah, I would definitely use C++, but if it comes to writing an executable application in general that doesn't necessarily have to actually have a window that you can move around, drag, resize, and such, then I would use C. And when it comes to writing a program in general that's going to be executable on a desktop, then I would probably use C++ as much as is necessary, and then write the rest of it as if I was using C. That's just more a personal style thing than anything else. I like Perl. In fact, regular expressions have their origin in Perl. All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and call it a day now, but I will be on tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. EDT, and then we can definitely continue from there. Learning regular expressions, I really ought to do a whole tutorial series on regular expressions. I don't actually right off the top of my head know where the best place is to go to learn regular expressions, but maybe go to Google and search for that. Yes, I am going to be doing this on Saturdays now. So starting tomorrow, same time as today, I'll be having another session. So I hope everyone has a good evening, and I will see you tomorrow.